I never imagined that being denied a simple business loan would spark the most incredible chain of events in banking history. But when that pompous bank manager dismissed me like I was nothing, he had no idea my brother was about to walk in and purchase his entire banking empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You know those moments when life teaches you that the universe has a twisted sense of humor? When everything you thought you knew about power and respect gets turned completely upside down in the most spectacular way possible. This is the story of one of those earth-shattering moments, and I'm Elena Vasquez, the woman who lived through every shocking second of it. It was a crisp Thursday morning in October, the kind of day when the golden autumn light makes everything look like it's been touched by magic. I had been running my small bakery, Sweet Dreams Pastries, for 3 years now, pouring every ounce of my heart and soul into creating the most delicious treats our neighborhood had ever tasted. What started as a tiny storefront had grown into something beautiful, a place where families gathered, where celebrations began, and where dreams quite literally came to life through flour, sugar, and endless determination. My bakery wasn't just a business to me, it was my sanctuary, my creative outlet, and my contribution to making the world a little sweeter. Every morning at 4:30, I would arrive to begin the day's baking, filling the air with the intoxicating aromas of fresh bread, cinnamon rolls, and my signature chocolate croissants that had people lining up before we even opened our doors. The locals knew me simply as Elena, the friendly baker who remembered everyone's favorite order and always had a warm smile ready along with their morning coffee. But success brings its own challenges, and mine had arrived in the form of an incredible opportunity that required more capital than my small savings could provide. The building next door had become available, and combining both spaces would allow me to triple my production, hire more staff, and finally launch the catering service that had been dancing in my dreams for months. The expansion would transform Sweet Dreams from a neighborhood gem into something that could serve the entire city, bringing joy and delicious moments to thousands more people. I had spent weeks preparing my business plan, working late into the night after closing the bakery, carefully documenting every aspect of my operation. My profit margins were excellent, my customer base was growing exponentially, and my reputation in the community was spotless. Every financial advisor I consulted told me I was the perfect candidate for a business expansion loan. My credit score was immaculate, my business history showed consistent growth, and I had already secured contracts with 3 major local companies for regular catering services once the expansion was complete. The numbers didn't lie. Sweet Dreams Pastries was not just surviving, it was thriving in ways that exceeded every projection I had made when I first opened. My monthly revenue had increased by 40% over the past year alone, and my customer retention rate was an impressive 97%. I had letters of recommendation from satisfied customers, testimonials from business partners, and a waiting list of potential employees eager to join our growing team. That morning, I dressed in my best professional attire, a navy blue business suit that I had purchased specifically for important meetings like this one. I wanted to look the part of a serious entrepreneur, someone who deserved to be taken seriously by the financial institutions that held the keys to my business dreams. My long black hair was styled in a sleek bun, and I carried a leather briefcase containing every document that could possibly be relevant to my loan application. I had chosen Prestige First Bank not just because of their reputation for supporting local businesses, but because they had actively marketed themselves as champions of small entrepreneurs. Their advertisements spoke eloquently about fostering community growth and helping ambitious business owners turn their visions into reality. Everything about their public image suggested they would be the perfect partner for someone like me, someone with big dreams and the work ethic to make them happen. The bank building stood majestically on the corner of Heritage Avenue and Commerce Street, an imposing structure of glass and steel that reached toward the sky like a monument to financial power. The architecture spoke of stability, success, and the kind of institutional strength that small business owners like me needed to feel confident about our financial partnerships. Walking through the revolving glass doors, I was immediately struck by the opulent interior design that seemed calculated to impress and perhaps intimidate. The lobby was a masterpiece of marble and mahogany, with soaring ceilings adorned by crystal chandeliers that cast dancing patterns of light across the polished floors. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, creating an atmosphere of refined sophistication that whispered of old money and established power. Everything from the fresh floral arrangements to the expensive artwork on the walls communicated one clear message: This was where serious financial business was conducted. I approached the reception desk with confidence, greeting the impeccably dressed woman behind the counter with my warmest professional smile. Her nameplate identified her as Jessica, and she looked up from her computer screen with the kind of practiced politeness that comes from years of customer service training. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, my voice carrying the enthusiasm that always accompanied thoughts of my business expansion. "I have an appointment with someone from your commercial lending department. I'm Elena Vasquez, and I'm here to discuss a business expansion loan for my bakery." Jessica's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up my appointment information, her expression remaining professionally neutral as she processed my request. "Of course, Ms. Vasquez. I see you're scheduled to meet with Mr. Harrison Blackthorne, our senior commercial lending manager. He's just finishing up with another client, but he should be available in just a few minutes." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The name Harrison Blackthorne carried a certain gravitas that suggested someone accustomed to making important financial decisions. I settled into one of the plush leather chairs in the waiting area, using the time to review my presentation materials one final time. Every page of my business plan had been crafted with meticulous attention to detail. From the executive summary that highlighted my bakery's impressive growth trajectory, to the detailed financial projections that showed exactly how the loan would be utilized and repaid. As I waited, I observed the other clients moving through the lobby, noting the expensive suits, designer handbags, and confident demeanor that seemed to be the uniform of success in this environment. Despite my professional attire and careful preparation, I began to feel slightly out of place among these titans of industry. But I reminded myself that I belonged here just as much as anyone else. My business might be smaller in scale, but it was built on the same principles of hard work, innovation, and customer satisfaction that drove any successful enterprise. The waiting area provided an excellent vantage point for people watching, and I found myself studying the interactions between bank staff and their various clients. There was a subtle but unmistakable hierarchy at play, with certain customers receiving noticeably warmer greetings and more attentive service than others. The bank employees seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to assess someone's net worth within seconds of meeting them, adjusting their level of enthusiasm and respect accordingly. 20 minutes passed before Jessica approached me again, her smile perhaps a degree less warm than it had been initially. "Ms. Vasquez? Mr. Blackthorne is ready to see you now. Please follow me." We walked through a corridor lined with portraits of the bank's founding fathers and various awards celebrating their contributions to the financial industry. The walls seemed to tell the story of an institution built on tradition, stability, and a certain exclusivity that made me wonder if my small bakery expansion loan was perhaps too modest for their usual clientele. Harrison Blackthorne's office was exactly what I expected from a senior lending manager at a prestigious institution. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city below, while expensive furniture and tasteful artwork created an environment designed to impress clients and reinforce the bank's image of success and sophistication. Behind an enormous mahogany desk sat a man who looked like he had been sent from central casting to play the role of a powerful banker. He was probably in his mid-50s, with silver hair perfectly styled and a face that had never known a day of financial uncertainty. His charcoal gray suit was clearly custom-tailored, and everything about his appearance spoke of privilege, power, and the kind of generational wealth that comes from making the right connections and maintaining them over decades. When he looked up from his computer screen, his pale blue eyes seemed to conduct an instant assessment of my worth and potential value to his institution. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, rising from his chair with the kind of measured politeness that suggested he was already going through the motions rather than genuinely engaging with a potential business partner. "Please, have a seat. I understand you're interested in discussing a business loan." His handshake was firm but brief, the kind of perfunctory greeting that established professional distance rather than building rapport. As I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, I noticed how his office was arranged to create a subtle power dynamic, with his chair positioned slightly higher than mine, and his desk serving as a barrier between us. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Blackthorne," I began, opening my briefcase and retrieving the carefully organized presentation materials I had prepared. "I'm here to discuss an expansion loan for my bakery, Dreams Pastries. We've been experiencing tremendous growth, and I'm looking to expand into the adjacent space to increase our production capacity and launch a catering division. I handed him my business plan, watching as he accepted it with the kind of casual disinterest that suggested he had already formed opinions about my application before I had even begun speaking. His eyes skimmed over the cover page, taking in the professional layout and comprehensive table of contents that had taken me hours to perfect. "A bakery," he repeated, his tone carrying just enough condescension to make me wonder if he considered food service businesses beneath the dignity of his institution. "And how much are we discussing for this expansion?" "I'm requesting $250,000, I replied confidently, having calculated this figure down to the last penny based on renovation costs, equipment purchases, initial inventory, and operating capital for the first 6 months of expanded operations. The loan would be secured against both my current business assets and the expanded property. And based on our current growth trajectory, I project full repayment within 5 years with the potential for early completion." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly at the amount, though whether from surprise at the size of the request or skepticism about my ability to handle such a sum was impossible to determine. He opened my business plan and began flipping through the pages with the kind of cursory attention that suggested he was looking for reasons to decline rather than approve the application. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, after what felt like an eternity of uncomfortable silence, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm for your little baking venture, I have to be honest with you about the realities of commercial lending at this level." The phrase "little baking venture" hit me like a physical blow, instantly diminishing 3 years of backbreaking work, innovative recipes, and steadily growing success into something trivial and inconsequential. I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment and anger, but I maintained my professional composure, determined not to let his condescending attitude derail my presentation. "Our bakery has shown consistent profitability and growth," I responded carefully, my voice steady despite the frustration building inside me. "Our customer base has expanded by 60% over the past 18 months, and we have a waiting list for custom orders that extends 3 weeks out. The financial projections in that business plan are based on conservative estimates of our continued growth." Harrison barely glanced at the detailed financial statements and customer testimonials I had included, instead focusing on what appeared to be my personal credit report displayed on his computer screen. His expression grew increasingly skeptical as he scrolled through information that I knew painted a picture of responsible financial management and consistent debt servicing. "The concern I have," he said, leaning back in his leather chair with the air of someone delivering unwelcome but necessary truth, "is that small food service operations like yours have an extremely high failure rate. The restaurant and bakery industry is notoriously unstable, with most establishments closing within their first 3 years of operation." His words stung because they represented exactly the kind of prejudice and dismissive attitude that small business owners face when trying to access the capital needed for growth. He was applying generic industry statistics to my specific situation, without bothering to examine the unique strengths and market position that set Sweet Dreams apart from typical startup ventures. "I understand the industry challenges," I replied, my voice growing stronger as my passion for my business overcame my intimidation at being in his imposing office. "But Sweet Dreams isn't a typical startup. We've already survived and thrived through the most dangerous period for new businesses. Our profit margins are exceptional, our location is prime, and we've built a loyal customer base that generates consistent revenue, even during economic downturns." Harrison's smile was patronizing in the way that made me feel like a child trying to convince adults to take my lemonade stand seriously. He closed my business plan without having read more than a few scattered pages, the dismissive gesture communicating more clearly than words that he had already made his decision about my application. "Ms. Vasquez, I think you're overestimating both the potential of your business and your own capabilities as a business owner," he said with a kind of false concern that barely masked his contempt. $250,000 is a substantial sum, more than most small bakeries see in total revenue over multiple years. Even if your current numbers are accurate, which frankly seems optimistic, there's no guarantee that success will continue once you expand. The accusation that my financial records were potentially inaccurate was particularly insulting, given that every number in my business plan had been verified by a certified public accountant and was based on meticulously maintained books that I personally updated every single day. I felt my hands clench involuntarily as I struggled to maintain my professional demeanor in the face of his increasingly offensive assumptions. "Perhaps," Harrison continued, clearly warming to his theme of explaining why my dreams were unrealistic, "you should consider a much smaller loan amount, maybe $20,000 or $30,000 for some minor equipment upgrades. Something more appropriate for a business of your scale." The word scale dripped with condescension, and I realized that Harrison Blackthorne had made his decision about me and my business before I had even walked into his office. In his mind, I was just another small-time entrepreneur with delusions of grandeur, someone who needed to be brought back down to earth by his superior understanding of financial realities. "I appreciate your input," I said, my voice carefully controlled despite the fire building inside my chest. "But I believe you're underestimating both my business acumen and the market research that went into this expansion plan. Sweet Dreams isn't just surviving in a competitive market. We're dominating our local segment and ready to scale up to meet increasing demand." Harrison's expression shifted from patronizing concern to something approaching irritation, as if my refusal to accept his dismissive assessment was somehow inappropriate. He tapped his gold pen against his desk, with increasing frequency, a nervous habit that betrayed his growing impatience with what he clearly viewed as an unrealistic conversation. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, his tone becoming more authoritative and less diplomatic, "I've been in commercial lending for over 20 years. I've seen hundreds of small business owners sit in that exact chair with similar dreams and projections. The vast majority of them overestimate their potential and underestimate the challenges of scaling up operations." His condescending lecture continued as he gestured dismissively toward my business plan, treating my carefully researched expansion strategy like it was a child's fantasy rather than a professional proposal backed by solid financial data. I could feel my jaw tightening as he spoke, but I forced myself to remain seated and composed, knowing that losing my temper would only confirm his preconceived notions about my unsuitability for a substantial business loan. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, clearly enjoying his role as the voice of financial wisdom, "your personal background doesn't exactly inspire confidence in your ability to manage a $250,000 loan. You're a baker, not a business executive. There's a significant difference between making cupcakes and running a complex commercial operation." The insult was so blatant and professionally inappropriate that I actually gasped audibly. He had just reduced 3 years of successful business management, financial planning, marketing strategy, and operational excellence to making cupcakes, as if my skills and experience were somehow less valid than those of traditional corporate executives. "Mr. Blackthorne," I said, my voice growing colder as my professional facade began to crack under the weight of his relentless condescension, "I think you're making assumptions about my qualifications that aren't supported by the evidence in front of you. My business has consistently exceeded industry benchmarks for profitability, customer retention, and operational efficiency." But Harrison wasn't finished demonstrating his expertise in crushing entrepreneurial dreams. He opened my business plan again, this time theatrically flipping through pages, while shaking his head in an exaggerated display of skepticism that felt deliberately designed to humiliate me. "These revenue projections are wildly optimistic," he declared, pointing at charts that showed conservative estimates based on actual historical data and confirmed customer commitments. No bakery in this market could realistically expect to achieve these numbers, especially not one attempting such an aggressive expansion timeline. I realized with growing clarity that Harrison Blackthorne had no intention of giving my application serious consideration. This entire meeting was nothing more than an exercise in institutional gatekeeping, a demonstration of his power to decide who deserved access to capital and who should remain relegated to the margins of the business world. "I notice you haven't asked me any questions about my operational plans, my marketing strategies, or my competitive advantages," I observed, my voice gaining strength as righteous indignation began to override my nervousness. "You seem to have made your decision about my application before examining any of the substantive information I've provided." Harrison's pale blue eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see that my observation had struck a nerve. He wasn't accustomed to having his methodology questioned, especially not by someone he clearly considered beneath his professional standing. The atmosphere in his lavish office grew noticeably tenser as the pretense of polite consideration began to evaporate. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge that revealed the steel beneath his polished exterior, "I don't think you understand how commercial lending works at this level. We're not in the business of funding hobby projects or enabling unrealistic fantasies. We have a responsibility to our shareholders and depositors to make sound financial decisions." The phrase, "hobby projects," was the final straw that shattered my remaining patience with his unprofessional behavior. Sweet Dreams Pastries employed 12 people, served over 300 customers daily, and had become an integral part of our community's social and economic fabric. Dismissing that accomplishment as a hobby revealed more about Harrison's prejudices than it did about my business qualifications. "My bakery is not a hobby," I said firmly, my voice carrying the passion and conviction that had driven me through 3 years of 18-hour days and endless challenges. "It's a legitimate business that provides jobs, serves our community, and generates substantial revenue. Your refusal to take it seriously says more about your biases than it does about my qualifications." Harrison's face flushed slightly at my direct challenge to his professional judgment, and I could see him struggling to maintain his composure in the face of what he clearly perceived as insubordination from someone who should have been grateful for any attention at all from his prestigious institution. "I think this conversation has gone far enough," he announced abruptly, closing my business plan with a decisive snap and sliding it across his desk toward me like contaminated material he needed to remove from his workspace. "Prestige First Bank will not be approving your loan application. The risk profile simply doesn't align with our institutional standards." The rejection was delivered with such casual cruelty that it took my breath away. 3 years of building something beautiful from nothing, months of careful planning for expansion, weeks of preparing documentation and projections, and he dismissed it all with the emotional investment of someone declining a subscription renewal. "That's your final decision?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from his body language and dismissive tone. "You won't even consider a smaller amount or alternative terms?" Harrison was already turning his attention back to his computer screen, clearly considering our meeting concluded and my presence an unnecessary distraction from more important matters. When he spoke again, he didn't even bother looking at me, treating me like an inconvenience that had already consumed more of his valuable time than it deserved. "Ms. Vasquez, I suggest you scale back your ambitions to something more realistic. Perhaps you could consider a small personal loan for minor improvements. Or maybe explore some of the microfinance organizations that specialize in smaller ventures." The way he said "smaller ventures" made it sound like he was recommending charity rather than legitimate business financing. I felt tears of frustration and humiliation threatening to blur my vision, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down in his office. "I understand your position," I said quietly, gathering my materials with as much dignity as I could muster while my dreams crumbled around me. "Thank you for your time." As I stood to leave, Harrison finally looked up from his computer screen, and I was shocked to see what looked almost like satisfaction in his expression. He had enjoyed wielding his power to crush my aspirations, and my obvious disappointment seemed to validate his sense of superiority and institutional authority. "One more thing, Ms. Vasquez," he said as I reached for the door handle, his voice carrying a tone of false helpfulness that barely concealed his condescension. "In the future, you might want to consider whether your goals are realistic before wasting busy professionals' time with impractical proposals." The final insult hung in the air like poison as I walked out of his office, my face burning with embarrassment and my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and devastation. The carefully planned expansion that would have allowed me to serve my community better, provide more jobs, and fulfill my entrepreneurial vision had been dismissed as an impractical fantasy by someone who had never baked a single loaf of bread or served a single customer. The walk through the bank's opulent lobby felt like a march of shame, with every employee and customer seeming to sense my rejection and failure. The marble floors that had seemed impressive during my arrival now felt cold and unwelcoming, reflecting my defeated expression back at me from their polished surfaces. I managed to hold myself together until I reached the sidewalk outside, where the crisp October air hit my flushed face like a slap of reality. Standing there on Heritage Avenue, clutching my briefcase full of rejected dreams, I felt smaller and more powerless than I had since the early days of starting my bakery, when every obstacle seemed insurmountable. The busy street continued its normal rhythm around me, with pedestrians hurrying past absorbed in their own lives and challenges. Nobody stopped to acknowledge the crushing disappointment radiating from my defeated posture, and why should they? Failed loan applications were as common as autumn leaves, scattered throughout the city every day as dreams collided with institutional gatekeepers like Harrison Blackthorne. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, desperately needing to hear a familiar voice that could remind me of my worth and capabilities. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized that explaining this humiliation to friends or family would only make it feel more real and permanent. Instead, I found myself staring at my brother's name in my contact list, remembering his repeated offers to help with my business that I had always politely declined out of pride and independence. Raphael had built his own empire from nothing, transforming a small technology consulting firm into a global corporation that employed thousands and generated billions in revenue. He understood the challenges of scaling a business, the importance of access to capital, and the frustration of dealing with narrow-minded financial institutions that couldn't see past their own prejudices and assumptions. But calling Raphael felt like admitting defeat, acknowledging that my dreams of independent success had been naive fantasies that required family connections to become reality. I had wanted to prove that hard work, talent, and determination were enough to overcome any obstacle, and asking for help now would feel like betraying everything I had tried to accomplish on my own. The autumn wind picked up, swirling fallen leaves around my feet and reminding me that seasons change whether we're ready or not. Standing there on the sidewalk outside Prestige First Bank, I felt like I was at a crossroads that would define not just my business future, but my entire sense of self-worth and capability. My phone buzzed with a text message from my assistant manager at the bakery, asking about the loan meeting and whether we should start planning the expansion timeline. The innocent enthusiasm in her message made my throat tighten with emotion, knowing that I would have to return to Sweet Dreams and explain to my dedicated team that our shared dreams of growth and opportunity had been crushed by one man's prejudice and institutional arrogance. But as I stood there feeling sorry for myself, a different emotion began to emerge from beneath the disappointment and humiliation. Anger. Pure, righteous anger at the injustice of being dismissed without fair consideration, at having my accomplishments minimized and my potential ignored by someone who had never faced a single day of the challenges I had overcome. Harrison Blackthorne had made a fundamental mistake in his assessment of my character. He had seen my humble beginnings and modest appearance and assumed that I would accept his rejection meekly, grateful for whatever scraps of attention his institution had deigned to provide. He had no idea that beneath my professional exterior burned the same fire that had driven me to build something beautiful from nothing, the same determination that had sustained me through countless obstacles and setbacks. The businessman walking past me on the sidewalk dropped his coffee cup, and without thinking, I bent to help him retrieve the scattered papers that had spilled from his briefcase. As we gathered the documents together, I noticed they were loan applications and business plans. Evidence that I wasn't the only entrepreneur struggling to secure funding for legitimate business expansion. "Rough day at the bank?" he asked with a sympathetic smile, clearly recognizing the shell-shocked expression that probably marked everyone who emerged from difficult financial meetings. "Something like that," I replied, managing a weak smile in return. "Apparently, my dreams are too big for my circumstances." He laughed ruefully, shaking his head as he organized his recovered papers. "I've heard that before. The funny thing is, the people who say that are usually the ones who've never risked anything or built anything themselves. They mistake caution for wisdom and pessimism for realism." His words resonated with something deep inside me, reminding me that Harrison Blackthorne's rejection was more about his limitations than mine. The banker had spent his entire career managing other people's money and making safe, conservative decisions within the protective walls of an established institution. He had never faced the terror and exhilaration of starting something from scratch, never bet everything on his own vision and capabilities. "You're absolutely right," I said, feeling some of my confidence beginning to return. "Success isn't about playing it safe or accepting other people's limitations. It's about believing in yourself even when nobody else does." As the stranger walked away, I realized that my story was far from over. Harrison Blackthorne might have the power to deny my loan application, but he didn't have the power to define my worth or determine my future. The same determination that had built Sweet Dreams from a tiny storefront into a thriving community institution would find another way to achieve my expansion goals. I pulled out my phone again, this time with a clear sense of purpose rather than desperate confusion. Raphael answered on the second ring, his warm voice immediately lifting my spirits despite the disappointment still churning in my stomach. "Elena!" "How did the loan meeting go? Are we celebrating your expansion approval?" The hope and excitement in his voice made me pause for a moment, gathering my thoughts before responding. I could lie and tell him everything went well, maintaining my facade of independent success for a little while longer. Or I could be honest about what had happened and accept that sometimes even the strongest people need support from those who love them. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and determined, "I think it's time we had a conversation about some of those business opportunities you've been mentioning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out." And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.